Hey guys, we're back. Jeff Gibson with True Covenant Ministry. Somebody asked a question if we would go back and give our interpretation of the book of First Timothy chapters 1 and 2. And the person that asked this, I have a great deal of respect for. And so I really have been kind of busy and haven't had time to really give it the time necessary to do this right. So anyway, we decided we'll just go ahead and do a video about it and do a teaching on it, and we'll just keep this in our library. Uh, just like with any other gospel or anything else in the New Testament, um, we have a lot of hurdles we've got to overcome that are not even as prevalent in the Old Testament as they are in the New, ironically, because we have the Old Testament in Hebrew. We know the original words, and we know those Dead Sea Scrolls are just pretty dead on to what we read in our King James Bible. But that's not necessarily, ironically, the case with the New Testament. Okay, we've got a lot of hurdles to overcome in this New Testament. I've said forever, there's never been a doubt in my mind that they were written in Hebrew. And there's a tremendous amount of evidence being turned up daily that these books being found in the Aramaic language. And so, but I'm not going to bring any of that in. We're just going to go from what the King James says about it. And I'm going to pull up, let me screen share with this. This is a King James Bible. This is the book of Matthew, and this is the preface to Matthew. But let's see what it says here. It says the great frequency of citations and allusions to Matthew found in the Didache, the epistles of Barnabas, the Ignatius, Justin, the Martyr, and others attest to its early composition and widespread use. The literary connections of this gospel must be considered in its relations to the other synoptics or the other gospels, and also to the statement of Papias. Okay, Papias lived, he died about 120 AD. So this claim was made by Papias, or it's not a claim, it was in writing, that, and let's see what he says. Or probably around 90 AD, Papias wrote that Matthew wrote his words in the Hebrew dialect. Okay, that's important. Okay, and each one interpreted as best he could from that Hebrew Aramaic. First off, probably these Greeks that are trying to translate this are probably not scholars on the Aramaic, right? They're Greeks doing the best. That's what he says. They interpreted as best they could. Okay. I just want to point out in the English translation, this King James Bible, the very next page, you cannot go 17 verses into the first chapter before our Messiah is disqualified, not once, but two different ways from being the Messiah. And I don't think he was truly disqualified from being the Messiah. I think that the interpretation has been poorly done. And so if you read the entire book of Matthew, there are three glaring mistakes. Most people aren't even aware of them, but there are three glaring mistakes. One of them is in the genealogy. And there are two after that are glaring mistakes. So far, I don't know. Last count I knew, I think they've found 28 books of Matthew in the Hebrew, in their original Aramaic. And in that Aramaic, all three mistakes in our English translation are gone. They are not there. In the true language, those three mistakes, all of a sudden our Messiah is no longer disqualified from being the Messiah, not one way, but twice. And both those ways in the genealogy are correct in the Aramaic, where every single English translation of the Bible, he's disqualified. Every single Latin translation of the Bible, he's disqualified. Every German translation, he's disqualified. Every Greek version, he is disqualified. There are mistakes that are not there in Aramaic. And so for that reason alone, I believe that it was originally written in Aramaic. Now let's look we're going to go and pull up another screenshot of either one of these should work. Let's try that one. Okay, this is a King James Bible. It's a preface to First Timothy. And let's read about the structure and the theme. First Timothy, in its briefest form, the structure can be indicated thus: a charge, a praise, and a charge. Stated in another way, it is a prose, poetry, and prose. Okay, that sounds like Greek to most people. However, let's go and take a look at this is, let's start down here. The recognition and analysis of Hebrew poetry has the added difficulty of distance. We're over a distance of time and interpretation. The poetry of the Hebrew Bible, was written more than 2,000 years ago in an ancient language only recently restored as a living tongue. Okay, so we have that problem, but let's go up and look. Talking about Hebrew poetry, Aramaic poetry. Poetry has been defined as pattern speech. This definition is ambiguous and deliberately vague because the distinction between poetry and prose in any language is difficult and contested. Okay, where do we just see this poetry and prose? And so what we find out in the Old Testament, the Tanakh, you don't see it in the English, but when you take that back to the Aramaic and the Hebrew, the Paleo Hebrew, all of a sudden it becomes poetic. It starts to flow. It's almost like a hymn. There's definitely poetry going all the way through this Old Testament. And the same thing when we come to this New Testament. In the English, we do not see it. But when we take those words back to the Aramaic, all of a sudden there's a poetry and a flow. And that's exactly what we just read. Let's see if I can get back to it. Where did we see that? Preface to Timothy. Okay, let's see. As indicated thus, there's a charge, a praise, and a charge. Stated in another way, it is a prose, poetry, and prose. That's telling us that there's a poetic form to that, right? And we don't see that much in the English. But you take that back to the Aramaic, and all of a sudden it becomes poetic. It becomes almost hymnal, like hymns. And so we have to understand that why is that even important? Well, it's important because of what it said in Matthew, right? That it was originally written in Aramaic, is what it's saying. And that people did their best, they did as best they could to interpret it. They were not, these early Greeks were not necessarily scholars of Aramaic, right? They did the best they could to interpret it. And so they're already, we're tripping over that first hurdle already. Okay, and then we go through all the different languages, right? We're going from Hebrew to Greek. And there's a hurdle there. People are stumped. They're doing the best they could, it says, but they're probably not scholars even. Okay. Second, then we're going from the Greek to the Latin, right? And again, every time we translate between a language, you're losing some of the flavor of that translation. Okay. And then when we go from the Greek to the German, once again, we're losing some of that translation. And then on into the English. Every time it's translated to a new language, we lose some of the flavor of what's being told. And so there's that. And then also, there is a very definite, when the Catholic Church comes in, they have a very definite ideology. Okay. And I don't agree with their ideology. Their ideology was wrong. I'll just say it. They were all about power, politics, and money. And those came first above other things. And, they didn't want anybody else to be able to read these scriptures. They wanted to be, I know what it says. I'll tell you what it says, and just come to me, right? The Catholic Church had a very definite agenda. And that really did not get any better as time went on, right? And we're going to look, everybody that's handled this thing has an agenda. And they're generally not right. Okay, so let's just look briefly at some of those agendas. Okay, let's look at Martin Luther. Why did Martin Luther remove 7 books from the Bible? He tried to remove more than 7. The Catholic Church very definitely had an agenda, and so did Martin Luther. Let's look at what it says about Martin Luther, right? Why did Martin Luther remove 7 books from the Bible? He tried to remove more than 7, right? If he'd had his way, we wouldn't have had Revelations. A lot of these books would not be in our Bible today. He wanted to make the Bible conform to his theology, okay? Just like the Catholic Church. Even if it meant removing books. He decided to remove Hebrews, James, and Jude from the New Testament because they were not compatible with his teaching that salvation is by faith alone. Okay, he had an agenda. He wanted to remove books, and ultimately, let me get out of here. I'm not going to go through all this stuff. I'm just showing my point. Okay. King James came out. King James had an agenda. Don't you think for a second he didn't have a reason for coming out with that King James. He was trying to smooth things over a little bit with Pope, right? The Geneva Bible was calling the Pope the Antichrist. King James come out and let's tame that down a little bit. All right. He had an agenda. And later on, these Protestants who are, kind of split from our founding fathers, right? Our founding fathers came to America and they said, they banned the King James Bible from the American shores. You could not have a King James in America when our founding fathers set up these colonies. It was banned. Okay. The Protestants also, they had no use for the King James or for King James himself. And ultimately, the Protestants went out and they had a very definite agenda. Right? They removed 14 books from the King James, from the original King James, that are not there anymore. And my point, if you take Second Baruch, for example, or Second Esdras, we know who Baruch was, we know who Ezra was. If you put those books that they removed back in this King James, we're not having this discussion today because everybody would already know what I'm trying to say is true. That in the last times, Esdras tells plainly, the whole book is written that the house of Israel is going to wake up one day and the earth is going to be on fire. And Esdras says, man, they all die. Is there nothing we can do? He sees the vision. He said, nobody survives this. Is there nothing we can do? And an angel comes to him and says, nope, there's nothing we can do. And he keeps having this vision over and over. And finally, the angel said, all right, well, go ahead and write this book. And it was Second Esdras. And he said that people in the end times were dying because they had turned their back on the Torah. That is exactly what Second Esdras says. That's exactly what Baruch says. That's exactly what these books that they removed said. Somebody didn't like that, didn't go along with their theology, and they wanted to remove them, and they did remove them. And Esdras, actually, the angel comes back and he says, okay, I've written this book, now what? He says, do we make a difference? And the angel said, very little. He said, in the end times, the house of Israel still burns. And he said, but there will be a remnant, a small seed who will find it. Okay, that was in the book that they removed. It's also in Baruch. It's even still in what we have. We just have to dig a little bit to find it. They couldn't get rid of it all, right? You're going to get rid of all the prophets. So anyway, there's that. We've got to overcome all these hurdles of all of these language changes, of all of these people who had a definite agenda. we've got to bypass around all of that stuff, and we've got to get back to what was given to us originally. And I'm not able in the King James, I can't take you back to the Hebrew, but I'll get as close as we can and go back to the Greek whenever possible, right? Because it's just that much closer to the truth. So anyway, there's that. And then, on top of that, what have we got, today? Are we at 70 translations from the Greek? At least. Every time somebody translates something, they have an agenda. And I showed the difference in NIV and the King James, right? In Romans 1, they took the word covenant breaker out of Romans 1. Somebody didn't like those words being there, and they removed them. Okay, this is the kind of thing throughout history for the last 1900 years that we're fighting to go back, or just go around all that stuff. Let's go back to what it said, right, as close as we can. So anyway, that's what we're trying to do with all of this, is go back as close as what we can to what was actually said. The next problem we got, anytime we're reading Paul, what's Peter say? Paul is very hard to be understood. Peter says, when Paul talks, it goes right over my head. Paul had to have some words with Peter. He had to straighten Peter up on some scriptural truth. Okay, he had to do it with John. He had to do it with the whole council in Jerusalem in Acts. Paul was having to straighten some things out. Okay, Paul was a genius, and that's the thing we have to understand. Paul is not a prophet. Paul is a genius. Okay, and so how do I know that Paul's not saying that the Torah is hung on the cross? Because nowhere in the Old Testament does he say that. Paul is not prophesying this stuff. He's saying what those prophets said. And he's hard to be understood. If you don't know what those prophets said, you will twist Paul's words to your own destruction. That's exactly what it says in 2 Peter 3:2, right? And all the way through, 17. That's exactly what's being said by Peter, okay? Which is exactly where we find ourselves. We've twisted Paul's words to our own destruction, because all our lives we've been told this Old Testament, it's good reading, but it's not for us. And that goes clear back to Martin Luther, what he was saying. That goes back to the Catholic Church. That has been an agenda throughout the last 1900 years. Okay, so we got to get past all that. And Peter says, if you don't know what's in the front of the book, you will not understand the back of the book. Not just what Paul's saying. He says you won't understand Paul. You're going to twist his words to your own destruction, as you do all the other scriptures. Okay, so we got to get around all that, and that's a long intro, but that's where we're at today. Paul was a genius. Paul knew this stuff. So anyway, that's kind of getting us started. So here we go. We're going to get in 1 Timothy. So Paul, the apostle of Yeshua HaMashiach, by the commandment of our Elohim and Savior, and Master Yeshua HaMashiach, which is our hope. And to Timothy, my own son, in the faith, grace, mercy, and peace from Elohim and our Father, and Yeshua HaMashiach, our Master. As I besought thee to abide still in Ephesus, as we'll go back now, when I went to Macedonia, that thou might charge some that they may teach no other doctrine. Okay, so what's going on here? Paul is trying to set up these new churches, and he is under attack all over the place. And so he's leaving Timothy in Ephesus, and he's given him a charge to make sure that no other doctrine is coming into this church that John has set up and that he is coming back and ministering to, okay? He's the genius on Torah. He's the one that's going to set it up correctly, okay? As I asked you to abide still at Ephesus when I went to Macedonia, that you may make sure that they teach no other doctrine. So before we can go on, we have to understand this. Paul is under attack from all four sides, right? Everywhere he looks. It's kind of like being a big old trophy buck deer in the middle of deer season in short grass. There's nowhere, he's getting it from every side. This is Paul. And so who's attacking Paul? Well, it's not just the Jews, okay, right? It's the pagan Gentiles. Okay, so let's go and look at some of these pagan Gentiles that are coming up against Paul, right? Let's go, we'll screen share. Okay, now we're going to go to Acts 19:24. And we're going to look at some of these pagans that are coming up against Paul, right? For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, which made silver shrines for Diana, brought no small gain unto the craftsmen. He was making a lot of money. Whom he called together, all these craftsmen and workmen in like occupation, and said, Sirs, you know that by this craft we have made our wealth. Moreover, you see and hear that not alone at Ephesus, where's this at? This is the Ephesians. This is where he's left Timothy, but almost throughout all of Asia. Thus Paul hath persuaded and turned away many people, saying they be no gods. Diana is not a god, which are made with our hands. So that not only this, our silversmith craft is endangered to be it not, but also that the temple of the great goddess Diana should be despised and her magnificence should be destroyed, whom all of Asia and the world worships. And when they had heard these things, they were full of wrath, and they cried out, saying, Great is Diana of Ephesus. Okay, this is where Timothy's at. Okay. And the whole city was filled with confusion. And having caught Gaius and Aristarchus, men of Macedonia, Paul's companions in travel, they rushed with one accord into the theater. And when Paul would have entered into the people, the disciples suffered him not. They stopped him because there were people wanting to get him. And who was after him? It was these silversmiths. And it was also the people, with all of these pagan gods that were mad at him, and they were ready to kill him. Like I say, Paul is like a big old buck deer in the middle of hunting season with nowhere to hide. Okay. He's got a lot of people. He's got a mark on his back, and a lot of people are wanting to take a shot at him. And these pagan Gentiles are one of them, right? So anyway, let's look at another, and we're going to go to Acts this time. Let me screen share again. Okay, we're going to go to Acts 18:12 now, and let's look at this. Let's see. And these are the Jews that are after him, right? It's not just the pagan Gentiles that are after Paul, right? He's going to have Orthodox Jews, rabbis that are upset with him, and that's these guys. And when Gallio was the deputy of Achaia, the Jews made an insurrection with one accord against Paul and brought him to a judgment seat, saying, This fellow persuadeth men to worship Elohim contrary to the Torah. Now, he didn't, but they're accusing him of that. And when Paul was now about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, If it were a matter of wrong or wicked lewdness, O you Jews, reason what that I should bear with you. But if it be a question of words and names and of your law, look you to it, for I will be no judge of such matters. He's talking clearly. Let me get out of here so we can talk about this. Okay. He's talking. Now I better go back just to show it. He's clearly talking about the Talmud. When Paul was now about to open his mouth, Gallio said unto the Jews, If it were a matter of wrong, wickedness, or lewdness, you Jews, reason that I should bear with you. But if a question of words and names and of your law. Okay, your law. That's the Talmud. This is what Paul got away from. Paul was in the Talmud big time. Paul got away from it. When he says your law, he's not talking about the Torah. He's talking about the Talmud. When you're talking about a question of words, they're always debating the Talmud. It's a constant debate. And there's this rabbi that'll say this, and now this rabbi says, no, that's not right. It's this. There's constant debate. And there's the rabbi named, Eleazar, or whichever rabbi that has this belief, where another rabbi comes and says, no, that's not right. Right. And so the words that they're debating and the names of the rabbis that are debating them is almost like they have a following. This rabbi has a following. No, this rabbi's right. He has a following. They're debating over what the Talmud says. And he's going to say later, it just leaves more questions. That's what he's going to say later. And your book of the law, right? Or your law. This is not the Torah. This is the rabbi's law. This is the Talmud. We've already been through and defined that the Jewish religion is not based on the Torah. It is based on the Talmud. Paul has gotten away from that. That's why he's calling it your law. Okay. And he says, if you guys want to argue about that stuff, you argue about it. He says, I'm not going to get involved. I'm not even a part of that. Okay. You look to do it. For I'm not going to judge such matters. I'm not even involved in that anymore. But anyway, so all that to say, we've seen the Gentiles who are out to get him, right? They were, and where was that at? That was at Ephesus. And Paul he's somewhere a long ways off, and he's writing letters to Timothy saying, I've left you here to make sure no other doctrine gets in. Okay. And we'll go on. Then he's also fighting Messianic Jews, right? Let's screen share again. We'll look at some of that. I mean, we've got to understand this stuff. So we're going to go to Romans. Romans. Okay, Romans. Let's 2:17. We'll just read a few. It's plainly. And these are from Judah, but these are Messianic Jews. And all through Romans, Paul is telling them, look, I'm talking to you who know the Torah. Okay, over and over and over. He's making a distinction between these Jews and the house of Israel, the Goyim, that's got to come back in. Okay, so what does he say? Behold, thou art called a Jew. He's talking to their Judah, and resteth in the Torah, and makest thy boast of Elohim, and knowest his will, and approveth the things which are more excellent, being instructed out of the Torah, and art confident that thou thyself art a guide to the blind, a light of them which are in darkness, an instructor to foolish, a teacher to babes, which has from a form of knowledge and truth in the Torah. Okay, these are Messianic Jews, right? He's not, this letter to Rome that he wrote to the Romans, he's talking specifically to those Jews that know the Torah. Okay, and it clearly says that over and over. Let's look again at Romans 7, 1. Know ye not, brethren, for I speak to them that know the Torah. Okay, he's talking to people who know the Torah. The entire book of Romans is nothing more than Paul telling these Jewish people that know the Torah that the house of Israel has every right to come back. And he's going to go on in 7 and show them another reason why. But know ye not, brethren, I speak to them that know the Torah, how the Torah hath dominion over a man as long as he liveth. Okay, again, right there, he's going to show through the wedding how this house of Israel is going to come back, but we're not teaching on that. Let's go to Acts 15:1. Okay, let's go back to Acts in 15. These are Messianic Jews. Paul he's fighting these guys everywhere he goes. These Messianic Jews that think they know better than Paul. Okay, 15, 1 through 5. Okay. And a certain man which came down from Judea taught the brethren and said, except you be circumcised after the manner of Moses, you cannot be saved. Now, this is a Messianic Jew saying this. He's accepted the Messiah. But he's saying you cannot become a believer in the Messiah without being circumcised. And Paul is going to take big time exception to that, right? The entire book of Romans 4 is nothing about other than that circumcision that he's arguing with this Messianic Jew and other ones just like him about. You cannot be saved. You cannot be a follower of the Messiah without being circumcised. When therefore Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and disputation with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain other of them should go to Jerusalem to the apostles and the elders about this question. And being brought on their way by the church, they passed through Phoenicia and Samaria, declaring in the conversation of the Gentiles, and they caused great joy unto all the brethren. And when they were come to Jerusalem, they were received of the church and the apostles and elders, and they declared all things that Yah had done with them. But there rose up certain sect of the Pharisees. These are not Orthodox Pharisees. This is in the church. This is the apostles and the elders, but there rose some certain that used to be of the sect of the Pharisees, which believed in what? The Messiah. Okay. Saying that it was needful to circumcise them and command them to keep the entire Torah. Before they could come in, they had to know all the Torah. They had to be circumcised. Okay. And we're not going to get into that teaching today in Acts 15, but James, name is Jacob, made a decision on that. He said, no, you're wrong. We're only going to ask them to do these three things, and we're not going to make them get circumcised, right? Okay, we know that. All right, so these are the Messianic Jews, the ones that believe in the Messiah, even some of them that used to follow the Pharisees and maybe were Pharisees. I don't know. But anyway, he's fighting with them. So now we've got these Gentiles that are definitely after him. We have these Orthodox Jews in Ephesus that are definitely after him. And in fact, they're going to be the exact same ones that bring the accusation against Paul that he brought pagans into the synagogue or the temple. And so he's got those Orthodox Jews. He's got these Messianic Jews. And then we find out he's even fighting with the disciples, and he's got to line them out too, right? So we're just going to go to Galatians and look at one example, but we know that's true. Galatians 2:11 tells us, but when Peter came to Antioch, I withstood him to his face, he says, right? Because he was to be blamed. So he's got everybody. It's like Paul against the world. Okay. The Gentiles are after him. The Orthodox Jews are after him. The Messianic Jews are after him. Even the disciples are against him to begin with. And they didn't trust him to begin with. So he's got to overcome all of that. Okay. So there's a lot of stuff we got to understand just before we can even start reading scriptures. Okay. So now let's go on. Let's go to our e-sword. We're going to go through, and if you think we can just read through Timothy and understand it, there's no way. You are not going to understand Timothy unless you go back, you look at what Paul was going through, you look at all of the things going on in the world, and you understand the prophets. You will not know what Paul's saying anywhere. Okay, guys, we're going to end this first video right here on Timothy. We didn't even hardly get into any teaching yet on Timothy. But before we got to know where the problems are at so we can address them before we go on to any kind of teaching. And so what we learned about all of the problems, the hurdles we're stumbling over. we can apply, and we need to apply to every single book in the New Testament, right? We have the same problem everywhere in the New Testament. And so we really needed to understand that before now we can get into Timothy. We know who's coming against him. We know who they are. We know all the players. And we can go in now and teach on Timothy and see exactly who's doing what in Timothy. And so, you've heard you got to, before you say anything about somebody, maybe you need to walk a mile in their shoes. Okay, we just tried to walk a mile in Paul's shoes. Okay. And so now maybe this is going to have more depth and more meaning when we read these words that he's writing to Timothy, that he's telling him, don't let anybody bring any of this stuff in. You're in charge. I charge you with this. Guard that door. Do not let any of this stuff come in. Okay. That's what we have to understand about Timothy. That's all he's saying in 1 Timothy chapter 1 is don't let any of this stuff come in. Okay. And so anyway, we're going to end it right here. We'll probably post another video within 24 hours where we do the actual teaching on 1 Timothy chapter 1. And but anyway, right now we're doing a set of videos right now on Romans. We're doing this one on Timothy, and we're also doing another video series about the sand of the sea covenant that goes squarely to the house of Israel, does not go to Judah. Okay. That's the covenant to the Gentiles. And so we're trying to do all three of these at the same time and still take care of a ranch and keep the lights on. So we're going to end it here. And until we see you again on the other side, when we start this next teaching, may Yahweh bless you. May Yahweh keep you. And may Yahweh's face shine upon you. We'll see you on the next one.